Wrestling has always been an industry which has utilized special attractions, those acts who don't need to be there on a week-to-week basis, but whenever they do show up, always garner some interest. Hell, this has been a staple of the business for decades now, going all the way back to the territory days. But who are the biggest examples of this? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with quite literally the biggest of them all, Andre the Giant. Yes, at a mammoth 7'4" in height, Andre the Giant was larger than life in every sense of the word. And this made him a very special attraction for any wrestling promoter looking to utilize him back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Really, the template was easy to work with back then for the Frenchman. Go somewhere like Memphis, wow crowds with his size, all while feuding with a top star for a while, and then after he was done with that, move on to a place like the AWA where he could rinse and repeat. That said, given the fact Andre's agent back in the day was none other than Vince McMahon Sr., it meant the bulk of his more famous moments would take place in the WWF, the company which served as sort of a home base to him during his peak years. And this would mean that as the 80s rolled around and Andre started breaking down physically, it would be in Vince McMahon Jr.'s WWF that he'd stay. Obviously then, this gave WWF a great tool to play with, and no better was Andre utilized than at WrestleMania 3 when he turned heel and challenged Hulk Hogan for the world title in what was, at the time, probably the biggest wrestling match ever put on. Sadly though, after doing the job to the Hulkster here, the Giant would be forced to seriously slow down, as by then his gigantism was becoming too much for his body to bear. So for the next few years, he becomes someone who mostly appeared in tag bouts whenever he did show up, allowing fans the chance to at least see him do his thing. And that's the position he would remain in all the way up until the point he sadly passed away in January of 1993. Will there ever be another special attraction on the level of Andre the Giant? Well, maybe there won't ever be someone quite on that same level again. But that isn't to say there aren't plenty of other people like him who have played a similar role over the years. In fact, you can even see a similar situation playing itself out today with our next subject, Omos. Now, Omos might not be someone people tend to talk about in the same breath as Andre the Giant, but there are a lot of similarities between the two, with the primary similarity being their size. That's right, at 7'3", this Nigerian absolutely towers over everyone he's put inside of a ring with. Needless to say then, this was something which served him well during his prior career as a college basketball player, and it would serve him even better once the time came for him to lace up his boots and enter the squared circle. No, Omos is unlikely to become a workhorse in the vein of a Shawn Michaels or a Bret Hart, but then he probably shouldn't be, as his real value is in showing up from time to time and making an impact whenever he does. After all, this kind of utilization is exactly what will make him so special. It worked to some extent during his early WWE main roster run, teaming up with AJ Styles at the beginning of the 2020s, and it also worked after he was taken on as a client by MVP for a while. Of course, since that relationship with MVP came to an end though, Omos has been largely absent from WWE TV. Where has he been? Well, for at least part of his time, he's been over in Japan working for Pro Wrestling Noah, one of WWE's current business partners. And it was here that he first really showed he had it in him to be a true main event star, as following him joining up with Team 2000X, he'd team with Jack Morris to become a GHC Tag Team Champion. Yes, in his short time out east, Omos was able to make quite a splash and become quite a hit with fans there, so much so that rather than drop the belts upon returning to America, he'd simply vacate them as nobody could beat him. Will this momentum as a special attraction be able to continue now that he's returned stateside? We guess we'll have to wait and see, because as of the time of this video's recording, he's yet to make his main roster return. That said, we are sure this will happen eventually, and when it does, Omos will offer WWE a prime opportunity to make a new superstar who can carry on at least a little bit of the legacy of someone like Andre the Giant. Now, we're not saying the big man has to become world champion or anything, but at least he should be a fearsome figure whenever he does appear, and in keeping with his special attraction status, those appearances should be spaced out so that they have maximum impact. Hell, it's not as if the WWE doesn't know how to book a big star who only shows up occasionally, because for the last decade or so, they've been doing exactly this with our next subject, the man who goes by the name of Brock Lesnar. Of course, it wasn't always this way for Brock. No, back during his initial run in WWE during the early 2000s, he was very much a full-time performer, someone who showed up on SmackDown every week to ply his craft and have memorable feuds with the likes of Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero. But by the time 2004 rolled around and he realized he was completely burnt out with the brutal WWE schedule, Brock decided to cut bait and try out his hands at other interests. What interests would these be? Well, after a brief spell on the gridiron, Brock would make himself something close to a household name when he entered the Octagon and became a UFC heavyweight champion in only his fourth professional fight when he beat Randy Couture by TKO. What relevance does this have to his special attraction status inside of a wrestling ring? Well, being a legitimate UFC champion meant that when he returned to WWE in 2012, he'd have an aura of legitimate danger unlike anyone else, as everyone watching knew just how tough he was. And that was exactly why it was him who was chosen to not only end The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak in 2014, but also to absolutely destroy John Cena a few months later in one of the most one-sided squashes in wrestling history. Sure, he wouldn't be there every week. Hell, sometimes we'd go months without seeing the Beast, even when he was holding on to the WWE title. But in the end, all that served to do was heighten the myth around him so that whenever he did show up, it really felt like the final boss had arrived. And that in turn always guaranteed a big box office return, as his appearances drew in a ton of interest from fans all over the world. Just look at Brock's feuds with the likes of Seth Rollins, Roman Reigns, and Cody Rhodes, just to name a few. Each of these followed the exact same pattern of having Brock make an impact in a short space of time, get the fans interested, and then disappear again for a while once it was over. That said, with it seeming like he might be gone from WWE for good now, there is a chance his latest appearance to job to the American Nightmare at August 5th, 2023 SummerSlam could be his last. But even if this is the case, he'll remain one of the biggest special attractions the company had for the years he was around. After all, we are talking about the man who broke the streak here. And if he ever decides to make a late career return to UFC, we could see him being a big-time attraction there all over again too, as he still has a lot of star power with that audience. But what of the man whose streak he ended? Isn't he a big-time special attraction too? Why, yes he is, and that's why our next subject is none other than The Undertaker. Of course, like with Brock Lesnar, The Undertaker's special attraction status wasn't always built on the idea that he was a part-time. No, while this was a role he'd settle into later on in his career, early on during the 90s and even the 2000s, he was very much a week-to-week performer. But even when he was there every week, Mark Calaway remained someone who felt special. And the reason for this was because his character was so unique and so protected. Yes, this is someone who barely even sold a lick of offense until about 1996. As you can imagine then, this all made the dead man feel like he stood out from everyone else on the roster. And that put him in a position where he never needed something like a world title. No, all he needed was just to be there and get audiences invested in his character. So well would this work for him, in fact, there were several points where he felt like a bigger deal than the actual world champion, and that would be something which would continue whether we were talking about his zombie mortician incarnation, his Lord of Darkness one, or his American badass biker from the early 2000s. Eventually though, the toll that working at a main event level for so many years took on his body meant Calaway would have to begin winding down as he entered more of a part-time schedule. But when this happened, it only made him that much more of a special attraction because, with him now sometimes only appearing once a year for WrestleMania season, it meant his dates would get a lot more interest as fans knew how rare they were. Even after his streak ended, in fact, he remained someone audiences were always interested in seeing. And that feeling amongst the fan base continues on today post-retirement, something which can be seen in his cameo appearances at the likes of WrestleMania 40. Yes, while he might be done in the ring now, The Undertaker can remain a special attraction within WWE for decades yet, so long as he's still happy to pop up from time to time and deliver a chokeslam or two. Seriously, is it really that unreasonable to think he'll still be making appearances by the time WrestleMania 50 comes around? This is, after all, someone who many thought would be done in the ring by the time the early 2000s came around. No, we fully expect the Phenom to be here for a long time to come yet, serving as a special attraction even in retirement. Who knows, maybe this will even one day see him come face to face with our next subject, Logan Paul. Yes, Logan is someone who built his name on being an attraction on social media platforms like Vine and YouTube, with him there becoming a very notable figure indeed. and come the late 2010s, this notoriety was big enough that it allowed him to branch out into the world of combat sports, first in a series of celebrity boxing matches between 2018 and 2023. For the purposes of today's video though, it's not his time in the boxing ring we want to focus on. Rather, it's his time in the wrestling ring. Yes, it was in 2021 that Logan made his first appearance inside of a WWE ring, and it was less than a year after this that he'd officially signed a contract with the company to become an in-ring performer, with his first match happening at WrestleMania 38 when he teamed with The Miz to defeat Bray and Dominic Mysterio. Sure, he might not be there every week, but like with Brock Lesnar, this part-time status has given him that feeling of a special attraction whenever he does show up, and that has allowed him to have further notable feuds with the likes of Roman Reigns, Ricochet, and Kevin Owens. Hell, more than that, it's even allowed him to win some gold, as it was on November 4th, 2023 at Crown Jewel that he'd defeat Rey Mysterio to become United States Champion. Where would Paul go from there? Well, he'd defend this belt for the next several months. 273 days in total, in fact, with him even managing to score a match with Cody Rhodes during this period. Of course, his time as US champion would eventually come to an end though, and that would occur when at SummerSlam on August 3rd, 2024, he'd do the job to fan favorite LA Knight. But that hasn't been the end of Logan Paul. No, he continues to show up from time to time as a special attraction, and that's the way it looks like he's going to be doing things for a while yet. Hell, given some of his recent appearances, we really wouldn't be surprised to see him enter into a feud with CM Punk before 2025 is over. And after that, maybe it'll be more world title challenges, or maybe he'll go down to NXT for a while and work with that roster too. Since he isn't really tied to any one particular brand on account of his part-time status, there's no reason the YouTube star can't spend some time in NXT working with the likes of Trick Williams and Oba Femi. If we are being honest though, he'll probably remain on the main roster, and that means he might one day come face to face with another celebrity wrestler who's made quite a splash in WWE over the last couple of years, the one, the only, Bad Bunny. Yes, ever since he first broke out in a big way in 2018 after doing a guest verse on Cardi B's I Like It, he's been one of the biggest hip-hop stars out there. And this is particularly impressive since he raps largely in his native tongue, Spanish, something which rarely gets as much interest with English-speaking audiences. But that's not the reason we're talking about Bad Bunny today. No, the reason we're talking about him is because as a lifelong wrestling fan, it was always his dream to get involved in the industry in some way. And his dream would eventually become a reality for him, as it would be at the 2021 Royal Rumble that he'd make his first appearance at a WWE show to perform his hit Booker T, all while Booker was standing right there next to him, of course. Where would he go next? Well, finding that he liked appearing at WWE shows, Bad Bunny took things a step further when he actually began training for an in-ring debut, a debut which would happen at WrestleMania 37 when he teamed with Damian Priest to take on The Miz and John Morrison in a tag team bout. And after having a shockingly good showing here given his lack of experience and the fact that he wasn't an athlete, the Puerto Rican would continue to make sporadic appearances for the company as a special attraction in the years following. Now, as far as we can tell, he's never been under contract or anything, but this hasn't stopped him from showing up whenever his schedule has allowed it, and it's clearly a labor of love for him. And it's this passion which has seen him wow audiences at shows like the 2022 Royal Rumble, WrestleMania 39, and most notably Backlash 2023, where he had his first and only singles match to date. Yes, in front of his home country of Puerto Rico, Bad Bunny would take on Damian Priest at this show in a San Juan street fight, and in doing so, he absolutely stole the show. Seriously, go back now and watch that one for the entrance alone where he comes out to his own hit, Chambea, all while the capacity crowd sings along with every word. Has he made appearances since then? Not yet, but given he is still on good terms with WWE, we expect he'll make another appearance sooner rather than later, and when he does, he'll feel like just as much of a special attraction as he did before. That said, Bad Bunny is far from the first celebrity outsider who came over to the world of wrestling and made himself a big-time special attraction in the process. No, this kind of thing has been going on for decades now. And one of the most notable early examples of this phenomenon would happen in 1985 when Mr. T arrived in WWF. Now, you all know who Mr. T is. After all, he's a bona fide pop culture icon of the 80s whose performances in things like the A-Team and Rocky III turned him into a household name for a while back then. And as it happens, it would be while filming Rocky III that the Chicago native would first cross paths with Hulk Hogan. Not that they'd be aligned in this one, of course. No, the pair wouldn't be aligned on screen until 1985, as that was when Vince McMahon decided to bring the Hollywood star into his company for a special appearance. Why was he doing this? Well, this was when he was planning WrestleMania 1, a show he hoped would introduce a far larger audience to his new idea of sports entertainment. And in order to catch people's attention, he rolled out the red carpet for a number of celebrities. But while people like Cyndi Lauper, Muhammad Ali, and Liberace would all appear at the inaugural WrestleMania, only one celeb would actually take part in a match, and that person would be Mr. T. That's right, in order to really sell the main event as being can't miss, Vince had booked a tag team bout which would see then WWF champion Hulk Hogan team up with Mr. T in order to fend off the challenge of Rowdy Roddy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. Would this strategy work? Why, yes it would. It would work gangbusters, in fact. So much so that WWF would skyrocket into the mainstream and Mr. T would be brought back again for WrestleMania 2, this time in order to take part in a worked boxing match with the Hot Rod. And that wouldn't be the last time Mr. T appeared in a wrestling ring either. No, while it would mark his last match in WWF, he'd make further appearances for their chief competitor at the time, World Championship Wrestling, during the mid-90s in a special guest enforcer role. And the reason he was making these appearances was because by that point the Hulkster had jumped ship and had joined the competition. Still, even if he wasn't in WWE's good graces for a while on account of this, it wouldn't stop the company from inducting him into their Hall of Fame in 2014 on account of just how important he was as a special attraction in helping to ensure that the first WrestleMania was the success it needed to be in order for the company to survive and thrive into the present day. But what if you're not a celebrity? Hell, what if you're not even a part-timer? Can you still be a special attraction then? Well, the answer to that question is yes, you can, but in order to do so, you have to be someone as special as our next subject, the Road Warriors. Ever heard of the term Road Warrior Pop? It was created specifically to describe the absolutely outrageous reactions Hawk and Animal would get from live crowds every time they came out through the curtain during their heydays of the 80s. All you had to hear were the first strains of Black Sabbath's Iron Man, and you knew you were in for something special. And the reason you knew this was because, even if they were week-to-week characters in places like Jim Crockett Promotions or the AWA, their aura was so strong that it never got old to see them do their thing. That's right, there's a reason many to this day consider the Road Warriors to be the greatest tag team of all time. Still don't believe us? Just look at the pandemonium that was caused whenever they headed out east to Japan and engaged in their trademark style of no-selling their opponent's offense, all while stiffing the ever-loving hell out of them in a way that only two legitimate tough guys like them could do. And if that's not enough, just look at the multiple runs they had in WWE, the most famous of which was probably their first one between 1990 and 1992, where now working under the name of the Legion of Doom, they quickly became the tag team champions. Really, it's still incredible to think that two people could feel like such special attractions despite never actually being special attractions at all on account of the fact they were always there. But then we guess that's just the power of the Road Warriors, and their star power would remain strong even into their later, less well-received runs, with this meaning that even if they weren't at their peaks anymore by the time the Attitude Era came around, they still remained wildly over with live crowds. Hell, even when Hawk passed away in 2003, Animal was able to keep the legacy of the Road Warriors alive for a while yet with a variety of different partners. Sadly though, with him also passing in 2020, it means the legacy of the team really is now set and there will never be any further additions to it. No, from here on in, the story of Hawk and Animal is firmly carved in stone, and that stone says they're maybe the greatest special attraction of their era, possibly even more than Andre the Giant. But then maybe they're not quite the best because there is another notable territory star who can challenge them for this spot. And that person is our next subject as it happens. Who are we talking about here? Why, Abdullah the Butcher, of course. Yes, back during the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, there were few, if any, people in the wrestling industry more feared than Abdullah the Butcher. That's right, if you thought Mick Foley was being too wild during the 90s when he was getting thrown off of cages, you haven't seen anything yet, because back during the territory days, Abby was taking things to such levels of violence it was too much for many in the crowd to bear. Needless to say then, this made Abdullah's appearances a hell of a special attraction, and this was something he knew all too well, which was exactly why he never stayed in one place for too long. Though back during a time when moving from territory to territory every so often was the norm, the Ontario native would follow the Andre the Giant template of showing up somewhere like World Class Championship Wrestling, causing an absolute spectacle, then moving on to somewhere else like All Japan. And this allowed him to create an aura around himself like no other, as the legend of Abdullah the Butcher became comparable in some fans' minds to the stories of horror characters. Not that this stopped people from showing up though. No, there was always too much of a curiosity with seeing the massacre unfold. And boy, was it a massacre anytime the big man hit the ring. Anyone who's ever been on the receiving end of his trusty fork will attest to that. Obviously then, being so violent meant Abby never got a run somewhere like WWF during their more child-friendly golden era, and that meant he never achieved the same level of mainstream fame as some of his peers did. But this, in many ways, only added to his legend as a boogeyman of the industry, someone who is too wild and too dangerous for TV for the most part. That said, even if he never was a fixture in New York, he'd still get inducted into WWE's Hall of Fame in 2011, mostly as a show of respect to just how much of an attraction he was back when he was doing his thing all over the world to a level of gruesomeness no one else could match. But let's move away from the territory days for now and back over to something closer to the present day, as it's there we find our next entry, someone who managed to have the dual role of being a regular character under the guise of Bray Wyatt, all while simultaneously being a special attraction whenever he adorned himself in the mask of the Fiend. Now, wrestlers having alter egos is nothing new to the industry. Hell, even wrestlers having spooky alter egos is something which has been happening for decades. But few people have ever managed to do this as effectively as Wyndham Rotunda did back during the late 2010s and early 2020s. And the reason we say this is because it was after his career was derailed following the questionable booking of his original Bayou cult leader character that he took some time off, recalibrated, and came back with a whole new act. What was this act? Well, it was that of a horror movie monster known as the Fiend, a figure of nightmares who served as the dark id to Bray's more fun-loving Mr. Rogers-style children's TV host. And that reinvention proved to be a huge hit with fans, so much that it completely turned things around for the then struggling star. So much would it turn things around, by the time 2019 was over, he'd be WWE champion after defeating Seth Rollins for the honor at Crown Jewel. And even after he lost that belt to Goldberg a few months later, he'd be able to bounce back when at WrestleMania 36 he gave us the Firefly Funhouse match, a twisted journey into the psyche of his opponent for the evening, John Cena. Obviously then, a big part of the reason The Fiend was so successful was because he was used so sparingly, never really appearing on a weekly basis. No, he basically served the role of Bray's nuclear option, something he'd pull out for pay-per-views or whenever he needed to lay someone out on weekly TV. And that kept the aura of the character strong all the way until Wyatt was released from his contract in July of 2021. Would we see The Fiend again after that? Not really, though we would see Bray as he would return to WWE in 2022 with an all-new gimmick of a man being haunted by the mysterious Uncle Howdy. Sadly though, with him having since passed away, it means there's no hope of a Fiend revival in the future, no matter how much fans might want this. Yes, not overexposing a gimmick can certainly help a wrestler to feel like a special attraction. And as we've seen today, special attractions can be one of the most important things to get right for any wrestling company.